Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the E3 podcast. I'm Melissa Johnson. Today I have Alex Breshears on, and we are going to talk about private money lending, something very close to my heart. So welcome, Alex. I'm so excited to have you on today to chat.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So you want to just start off by telling people a little bit about you and what you've been up to and where you're at now.
Yeah. So my primary label when it comes to real estate is I'm a private money lender. When just personally, I'm a military spouse. I've been married to an active duty service member, Navy service member for the last 20 years. That kind of forced us to move 19 times in 20 years, like I mentioned earlier. And the reason I bring that up is because that really shapes how I decided to invest in real estate. Because if you're only living somewhere for, 3 years or 3 months, 6 months, maybe 9 months, real estate tends to be a rather slow moving asset. So the idea of trying to do a fix and flip in 3 months or 4 months while you live there, much less learn the market and all of that, just never really suited us. And the idea of, trying to be a landlord from thousands of miles away was never really attractive. We did attempt it. We regret attempting it. We will never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with a fix and flip. We just, didn't enjoy, we don't have children. To be quite frank, we don't like children. So the idea of having to babysit other human beings is not appealing. And anybody who's ever done a fix and flip or has been a landlord knows a good portion of your quote unquote job in those roles is babysitting other people. So when we started kind of closing the doors for what we didn't want to do, that actually inadvertently led us down a hallway to open doors for things that we did want to do, largely centered around private lending and passive investing in multifamily real estate.
That's so interesting. I love that you said that because I think this is a thing like a lot of people don't think about, right? You think, well, I'm going to get into real estate, right? But sometimes we don't stop and think about like all the different ways to be involved in real estate.
Absolutely.
A lot of people just assume like you have to be a wholesaler, or you have to be a realtor or a fix and flip or a landlord, but private money, like I just had a conversation with a client about this the other day too, because she's kind of in the same spot about, living in a different place and the concerns about investing in different areas and having to manage all that, tenants or contractors or anything. And I had actually mentioned to her, have you thought about being a private money lender? Like it's a great way to be involved in real estate without having to be so hands-on. So I think
Absolutely.
that's smart that you guys realize like, okay, this is not like that's going to be a good fit for us over like some of these other options, I guess.
Yeah, I really feel like in the real estate space, one of the first conversations that needs to be had by anybody that wants to do real estate investing is stop and think about what do you want from real estate investing? Because a lot of people say, oh, I want 20 doors and I want to retire with my income, my quote unquote passive income from being a landlord, having 20 single family homes, for example, when they don't realize that's not exactly as passive as the commercials at late night, gurus sell you, that having 20 doors is not nearly as passive, even if you have a property manager involved. And also, nobody's really talking about the skills and personality that you might need to have and or develop before you actually start investing. So like you mentioned, wholesaling, that tends to be someone who really needs to be a go-getter, a hustler, happy to talk to people, willing to answer the phone at 2 a.m. when you have an urgent seller. And that's just not me. I'm just like, no, I'm going to let it go to voicemail. I enjoy my sleep. Whereas private lending tends to be much more collaborative. I'm a real estate investor, just like my borrower is, that's an active investor. We're working together. We have the same goals. We both want the property renovated. We both want the property rented, refinanced, sold, whatever the exit strategy is for that particular property. So it's a much more team effort, like, hey, let's work together, let's figure this out. And that suited my personality a lot more than being a landlord where it's almost adversarial, especially in kind of the COVID times. It's these rich landlords that are just dying to kick out these, working poor folks that were affected by the pandemic. It's almost vilified right now the way it is in the media. And that just never really suited our style. We'd much rather be part of a team working on something bigger than being kind of thought of as the enemy.
I agree. I do not like being a landlord. I'll be the first one to say it. Like, no, I don't. you know, and even though I don't manage my own properties anymore, still, like, it's still something that you have to deal with. Like you said, I mean, there is that personality thing. And I think that was after landlording for a while, I realized, like, I don't enjoy this because I get too wrapped up in the story and the emotions. And, you know, now, like, the whole, like you said, being a villain, and I'm just like, I'm over it. I don't like doing this. I know it's good to do it, and it's good to have a good portfolio with a mixture of things in there, but the landlording is like, yeah, that's a tough one. So let's talk about, so tell me how your stuff is structured. Like, are you making the loans yourself, or are you bringing together other private money lenders and kind of pooling funds together, and kind of walk us through how that's set up for you?
So I will give you a little bit of disclaimer. One of the wonderful things about private lending and one of the terrible things about private lending is the flexibility. So what I do as a private lender is not gospel. You know, I know other private lenders that do things totally differently. So I
Mhm.
can talk about in general terms just to give you an idea of what the process looks like. But generally, you are acting as the bank. So you are providing funding for either the purchase of the property. Maybe you come in the second lien position and you provide funding for, say, renovations or holding costs for the first lien, you know, whatever the situation happens to be according to the active investor and your risk tolerance. And then your loan is actually, the money is dispersed through the title company only. So you are not, you know, going over to the active borrower's house and saying, hey, here's $15,000, go ahead and, you know, do what you will. All the money exchanges hands through a title company or a closing attorney. You're going to have a recorded deed of trust or mortgage, depending on the state you're lending in, on that property. So it's public interest is shown that you have a lien on that property, obviously in the first lien position or second lien position, depending on what type of mortgage you decided to fund. And then there's also going to be a promissory note, which is signed by the borrower. You obviously will keep that original. And it's the promissory note that actually outlines all the terms of the loan that can be negotiated with the borrower. So that's everything from the length of time the loan is out, if there's any sort of extension, what the fees might be, what's considered default, what the monthly payments are, where you're making the monthly payments, you know, how the monthly payments are calculated, all the little legalese that needs to be in there for a promissory note. Will be in there. So that document tends to be anywhere from 6 to maybe 12 pages, depending on how thorough the lender wants to be. And then the other thing that I usually advocate, I personally require it, is lender's title insurance. And that's something the borrower pays for. And lender's title insurance covers just the lender's interest in the property. So for example, if you as an active investor decided to buy property, say from a wholesaler, and then it just happens to come to light after the closing that somewhere in there the title was forged, you know, somebody signed the deed for grandma didn't actually sign the deed, so the transfer of the title was actually null and void. The lender's title insurance would cover the lender's monetary interest in the property. I usually advocate my borrowers also get owner's title insurance. It's normally just a couple $100 extra if it's issued at the same time as the lender's policy. And then that protects the active investor's interest monetarily in that property as well. So I will be on there as lender's title insurance. We're also on the homeowner's insurance, whether it's hazard insurance, you know, builder's risk policy as a loss payee. So if there is a claim made for insurance, or the policy lapses or it's canceled, we are actually, you know, kind of forewarned, hey, there's something going on with this policy, because obviously from a lender's perspective, we want to make sure that the insurance is actually, you know, adequate and in place, because, you know, if you go ahead and do 2, 3, 4 months of renovation to the property, you're getting ready to put it on MLS and then it burns down the day before you put it on MLS, that could be a significant loss if they don't have the right type of insurance on the property.
That's a good point to bring up too. I think a lot of people overlook that part of it, is that when you are getting, even when you're using private money, you need to have those insurances in place. I've been on both sides of that, because we talked for a minute before we started recording, but I've used nothing but private money for the last 18 years, which is my whole career in real estate. So every transaction has been with a private money lender. And yeah, we do get the extra insurance too. All those things. Also, I was just wondering, like, do you have, I know some, and again, like lenders do everything different, right? You're right on about that. Terms are different, like everything's can be different. So two things. One is, do you do a personal guarantee? Because I know I've got like one lender, I think, that requires a personal guarantee in addition to all those things that you talked about. Do you guys do that too?
We usually require a personal guarantee. So everybody, normally it's going to be my LLC lending money to another LLC, because that's kind of the area where the least amount of regulation, the highest level of what can be charged as far as interest rate and fees. So it's considered a commercial loan, even if it's on a, single family residence is still considered a commercial loan because it's from one business to another business. So everybody who's on that LLC will sign the document and have a personal guarantee on that document.
Yeah, and I think that's smart. The few times I've done private money lending, I've done that as well. I just think I don't know that everybody does that, but I think it's a good way if you're going to get into this to protect yourself too. So then the other
Absolutely.
question I had too was going back to terms, because there can be a lot in there, right? Do you have different terms for different clients? Like do you kind of have like, well, if you've never done a deal with this person, here's the terms we use, and maybe you've done like a few deals with that person and now, maybe the terms change. Do you change those up depending on who the borrower is?
Yes, absolutely, because that's going to change based on what I perceive as the risk for that particular loan, whether it's risk from the property, risk from the borrower, whatever the situation happens to be. And also it's going to change according to which lien position I'm in. So if I'm in the first lien position, that's obviously considered a more secure position as far as debt goes, versus being in the second lien position, you're going to be in a higher possibility that you'll be wiped out if the property does get foreclosed on. So that's obviously going to be a higher rate. The other thing that I do, kind of my pet peeve with active investors is I get messaged almost daily, hey, what are your rates? And I'm like, oh my God, it doesn't work like that. It's literally a very much a relationship based model. It's not going to be, you call 1-800 private lender and we have a term sheet in front of us. That's just, most private lenders that I know are not that liquid. So they're not going to have like a little nice little term sheet, and we're not going to do things like most private lenders I know, for example, don't even check credit scores. They might pull your credit report just to see, the debt levels, but for the most part, they don't care about your credit score. So it's a different approach entirely than what I think most people are used to when dealing with either a hard money lender or just a conventional bank lending, because it tends to be much more relationship based. And there are other terms that can significantly impact you for the better or worse as a borrower, other than the interest rate. So for example, if my loans are only out 3 to 4 months, because I only fund fix and flips in my little market here in Virginia. So if a borrower's, having an issue between paying 8% and 9%, that's, nothing over the course of 3 or 4 months. But at the same time, I can go and say, okay, I don't need interest only payments for that 3 or 4 months. We can roll all the interest into the end of the loan because it's so short. And then their retail buyer ultimately ends up paying the interest, for the property when it goes to sell. And I'll say, I'll do that, but it'll be 2 points higher, because obviously that's more risk to me as the lender to go and say, hey, don't worry about making monthly payments. But that's a term that you can negotiate and say, look, this is mutually beneficial. I earn a little bit of extra interest. Obviously, I'm taking on a little more risk. But also the borrower, if anybody's ever done a fix and flip, you are hemorrhaging money for the first 2 or 3 months you own that property. So if there's some way that I can make it a little easier for them, because again, going back to that collaborative nature, we both have the same goals. If I can make it easier for them to reach that goal by hemorrhaging maybe even a little less money every month, and that maybe potentially gets the deal done faster, gets better finishes, it appraises higher. There's all these kind of downstream effects that happen when you come to the table with a more collaborative mindset versus just what's your rate. So most private lenders I know don't have kind of a rate sheet. They're like, oh, you've done 5 deals. So, okay, yeah, let's go over here. 5 deals in the last 12 months is 10% for a first lien. Like, it just doesn't operate that way. It really depends on the metrics of the borrower and the property. Most private lenders I know will do some level of a discount for borrowers that they've done multiple deals with. And I myself will do that. I'll tell them, you know, the first loan you do with me is going to be the most expensive one. But then after we've had one, you know, one successful cycle and we have the history together and everything went smoothly, then yeah, the next one will be cheaper, because in my mind, you are less of a risk because we have that positive history together from the previous loan.
Right. And you said something that's key, and I just want to like underscore this, that it really is a relationship. It really is. Like you have to, you can't go into a private money lender the same way you would go at a hard money lender. It just is not the same at all. Those relationships have to be cultivated sometimes over time too. You know, I remember when we got started, we had a mentor that was providing private money for us, which was really nice. But when that relationship ended, you know, had to go out and find new private money lenders, because, you know, once you get a taste of that, it's like, that's all I want to do is mess with the private money lenders because it's so much easier. And but sometimes, you know, they don't know you from anybody else, but you know, if you have proof of concept and you're willing to invest the time building that relationship and really, you know, showing people, you know, these people like what you've done, if you're able, I feel like the more you're able to show what you've done, and this is something I always encourage people to do when they're seeking out private money lenders, is to like put something together, show numbers on some of the deals that you've done, just show some before and after pictures. Like, how long did you hold the property? Were you on budget? Were you under budget, over budget? You know, what did you sell it for? Was it above or below what you know, like the numbers tell the story really, but then you also have to you have to build a relationship with them, and they have to trust you. You know, that I
Yeah.
think the trust is a big factor too. Sometimes we're buying
I,
a lot of
I mean,
money.
I tell active investors all the time, I actually call it a real estate resume. So I'm like, put together a PowerPoint presentation that starts off with, you know, the terms that you're willing to pay, you know, or just kind of what you're looking for as far as a lender goes, you know, the terms, the area, because it tends to be, private lending tends to be very region, you know, market specific.
Mhm.
So most of the private lenders I know will only lend in, say, a certain city, you know, possibly a certain state on the outside, but you know, it's not going to be like you found a private money lender in New Mexico and you're in Utah and they're going to lend in Utah just because you found a private money lender in New Mexico. I mean, it tends to be very hyper regional to wherever that private money lender lives. There are some that will lend kind of outside of their local market. Maybe they live in California, for example, and you know, they will lend. I know one private lender that lives in California and lends almost exclusively in Indianapolis, for example. So I mean, that is a possibility. But again, going back to that, no two private lenders are the same. But I think that's a common misconception with active investors. They're like, oh, I found a private lender, they'll fund my deal, you know, anywhere I am. And it's just not the case. And it's also the case of, you have to have the right property. You know, for example, I only fund fix and flips that are single family homes in my local market. There's other people that will fund, you know, only duplexes because they want to target buy and hold investors, for example. So having that real estate resume together that shows what type of property you're trying to purchase, what your business plan is as far as exit strategy to get that loan repaid, and then start in with your history. And if you have any kind of links to public documents that show, hey, here's where I took over title, here's where the loan was paid off, you know, all those things that basically can't be forged. Because if we can go and look on that municipality's website and see, oh yeah, they took title on December 12th and then they turned around and, you know, signed off on title, you know, in April, then you know the deal only lasted 4 months, and then you can see the satisfaction of mortgage recorded about a month later. And so, you know, what the story the borrower is telling you kind of jives with the paperwork. And again, you can see the pretty pictures. Here's what it looked like when I bought it. Here's what it looked like when I refinanced it or sold it. And that does go a long way. And I've also told active investors to put this little presentation together, make a short version, you know, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and just record themselves doing this, upload it to some video thing. And then when you do run across someone, it could almost be like a digital business card. Like, hey, here's some information about me as an investor. And it doesn't even have to be sales pitchy. It just be like, here's what I'm doing with other private money lenders. If you're interested in earning, you know, 8 to 14% just passively and helping me scale my business, and whatever kind of humanitarian aspect, you know, warm and fuzzy feeling you want to leave them with, it doesn't even have to be about the numbers. If you're doing the short kind of, you know, I hate to say sales pitch, but shorter kind of elevator pitch video.
Mm-hmm. Or, even just doing like a case study type thing too. And that's a good way too, because you're not out there tooting your own horn like, look what I did. It's more like letting the numbers speak for you. Like, here's the study. Here's, we bought this property. This is what it looked like. This is how much we bought it for. This was, the lead source, what we paid for it, yada, yada, all that stuff. I think I know that for me as a private money lender, I like to see those things too. And I think those are important things to know when you're vetting somebody. So let's talk about that for just a second. Like, do you have anything else that any other ways that you vet potential borrowers?
Oh yes, my two favorite. My number one go-to is I'm going to Facebook stalk you. So if you contact me for some sort of private lending, I'm going to friend request you, and I'm going to scroll through your profile, and not so much to be intrusive, but I want to see kind of what your decision-making process is. Are you someone that's flashing a bunch of cash, standing in front of a rented Italian sports car for the day? Like, that's not someone I generally want to work with. But are you someone that, has photos of, out playing golf with your kids, or, whatever it happens to be? Because again, I'm going to invest just like everyone else does with people that I know, like, and trust. So I'm going to look for things that I know, things that I like, and things that I trust. And I'm going to find that on Facebook. I'm going to Facebook stalk you if you are an active investor. So I always advocate, not that you're trying to hide things, but like, I don't need to see, when you go out Friday nights with your girlfriends to have margarita nights, like, and you all are, they're making the duck face in front, holding your margarita at the table. Like, I don't need to see that stuff. So go ahead and, make a professional profile, and that's going to be your quote unquote real estate profile. It doesn't have to be all real estate. It's obviously not LinkedIn, but, don't put that stuff on LinkedIn either, by the way. And
That's a good tip for people.
Right, don't do that. But again, it's not necessarily hiding who you are. It's just you're presenting a certain aspect of you as a person. Right. So that's going to be number one. And then number two is I ask for 3 professional references in real estate. So it could be a broker that you closed a deal with. It could be a contractor that you used on your last job. It could be previous partners that have worked with you, just somebody that has worked with you, has experience with you in the realm of real estate. So I will obviously call them, have a quick conversation with them. But what I do for my next step is I actually ask them for a professional reference for someone else that they know will have worked with the borrower. So I kind of get what I call a secondary ring. And that secondary ring tends to be where you get the real good, juicy stories, because obviously the people that the borrower provides are just going to give these glowing recommendations. And then if you go and ask those glowing recommendations for someone else, like, oh yeah, I know Bob did a deal with him last year. Here's Bob's contact information. Then when you call Bob, and then, Bob, basically airs his dirty laundry out to you and says, hey, yeah, he was a partner in my deal. He never paid for anything. He argued with me. He dropped the ball, this, that, the other thing. Like, okay, whoa, if he was the problem in that deal, and now Bob is not there to pick him up, do I really want to lend to him as a borrower if I'm funding fix and flips and the loan is a very short time frame? So it's things like that. So I always advocate. There's this thing I call the real estate underground network. So, whatever your reputation happens to be, whoever you're interacting with, that's going to get around. So if you're going to go into a deal, you need to make sure you're on the up and up, because that reputation, especially if you're working only in one market like I do, I know most of the people in my area that do real estate in some capacity, whether I've met them or I know people who know them. It's a small world. It might feel like everybody is doing real estate, but in reality, it's a small world. So I would say be very guarded about making sure you maintain a positive reputation.
Yeah, I think that's always good practice, no matter what, not only for, approaching private money lenders, but even for sellers too. That's something I advocate very heavily for, is get your testimonials out there, because nothing speaks more about you than somebody else saying it, right? Instead of, you having to say all these things about yourself. If you've done good business with somebody, for them to promote you, I think is good. And I love that whole, what is it? The second circle thing. It kind of made my brain go, that would be great for hiring too. Like, not just
right.
for vetting people, to lend money to, but even when you're hiring somebody, do you know somebody else that knows this person? Because that's kind of like, that's a little gold nugget there.
Right.
I'm going to use that one. So if people are thinking about, approaching a private money lender, what are some terms you think that someone could expect getting started? You know, because a lot of people, they kind of just don't know like what's good, what's not. Can you kind of walk us through that?
I would say most private money lenders are probably going to be on the same level as far as what you're going to pay as far as an annualized interest rate as your hard money lenders. I do know some active investors that will have, loans that are 5, 6, 7 years with the same private lender, and they tend to be a little bit better interest rate. They're still not going to be like the record lows we're seeing with conventional money. They're never going to be in the 2 and 3% range. But they might be in the 6 or 7% range for that longer term loan.
Mhm.
But traditionally, they're going to be anywhere between 8 and 14% for a first lien position. Again, really basing everything on, what the risk of the person and the property is going to be, and then also the state. And then I would say for fees, tends to be really light on fees compared to a hard money lender, because hard money lenders are going to have a lot more overhead. They're going to have official underwriters on their staff. They're going to have official loan processors on their staff. They're going to have closing coordinators. So all of those people have to get paid somehow. So I would say from the fee standpoint, it tends to be a lot cheaper than hard money. Origination points kind of, again, all over the board. It's anywhere from 0 to 5 is what I say would be typical. But again, all of that can be negotiated. So for example, if you have a private money lender that says, oh, I charge 2 points as an origination fee, and you go, okay, great, I'm okay with that. Can we pay the 2 points out of closing on the back end when I sell it versus 2 points up front when I buy it? And that might be totally fine. So again, going back to my pet peeve where so many people kind of zero in on just the interest rate they're paying on an annualized basis, when there's so many other terms to the loan that could potentially be negotiated for the betterment of the deal for the borrower.
Oh yeah, I agree with that a lot. I use multiple private money lenders, and they all have, we've all negotiated different terms throughout the years, right? So like I have a long-term private money lender that he charges more interest, but he will carry it out for a long time. Because a lot of private money lenders, I think it's important to note, this has been my experience, maybe I'm wrong, but they won't carry out a long-term loan typically. It's usually like a year or less has been
Yeah,
my experience.
I would say 12 months is usually about average for the longer term. I
Mhm.
do know some that'll do about 18 months, but like I said, it's a very small pool for people that will do those longer term loans. I'm
Right.
talking two to maybe 6 years is what I would consider a longer term private loan. They're out there, but again, those people, in my experience, tend to not self-identify as private lenders, for example. Those are going to be people that come kind of out of the woodwork, through your network. They're maybe older retired folks that have some cash sitting around and they just want that monthly, dependable income stream coming in. So they're happy getting 6 or 7% over the next 5 years, because that beats it sitting in a CD collecting, 1.5% right now for the next 5 years. So it really goes to show that that relationship is there. So if you can solve their problem and solve your problem at the same time through the way the terms are negotiated, then it's a win-win. So again, going back to that very collaborative nature that private lending tends to be.
Yeah, terms are everything, I think, with private money lending, because there are so many ways to structure it. Like with that long-term private money guy I have, like he charges a higher interest rate, but I'm okay with that because I know he'll carry that loan out over the long term. For like if I want to buy a rental or do an owner finance and do a wrap or something, I know that I can go to that person and we can do that deal, even though it's going to cost me a little bit more. But the odds of finding another private money lender to do that aren't going to be that great. But I also have been able to negotiate with the short-term lenders, different things. So like no payments, or, reduce the interest rate over time. One I used for a long time, we were at 10% forever. And finally it was like, I just went back and I said, okay, we've been doing deals for 10 years now. Do you think I've got a new lender that's charging me only 8%? Would you be willing to match that? And because we've had such a good relationship over the years, it was really easy to have that conversation. And she just was like, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Or like the no payments too is a big deal for a lot of people. And I try to set all mine up like that, because I just don't like to mess with all that, while you're trying to rehab a house and worry about making payments and stuff. It's a lot easier to just pay it on the back end. So I recently picked up a new private money lender, and he charged me a higher interest rate because it was our first deal, But in exchange, I said, well, okay, I'll pay the higher rate, but can we do no payments? And he said, yeah, we can do that. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to negotiate the terms on those things. And I think it's important to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just not a lot of education out there from both the perspective of how to do private lending and also to how to work with a private lender if you're an active investor. Because if you think about, just the education that's out there, Bigger Pockets, for example, they have books on how to buy your first apartment building in 30 days and, go out and here's how you vet out a scope of work and price it out. But, anytime private lending's mentioned, it's, go find a private lender to fund your deals. And then they're just kind of left with, okay.
How do I do
So their only experience is hard money lenders or, conventional lending. So when they start a conversation with a private money lender, it tends to go along those same lines and they don't realize how different the entire experience is.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some ways that if people are searching out a private money lender, what are some ways that people can do that?
I would say first and foremost, start networking. If nothing good came out of COVID, the ability to virtually network with people anywhere has become a huge, huge bonus. So when you see these virtual networking events or these educational Zoom events, a lot of times they have time for kind of chit chat at the beginning and chit chat at the end, or maybe they have some sort of formal networking component at the end. You want to get out there as an active investor and kind of literally just, promote yourself, what you're doing. If you're active in Facebook groups, for example, or you're active on Bigger Pockets, always making comments, always adding value, you start kind of being seen as kind of the person in that market that knows a whole bunch of stuff. You are the market expert in wherever you happen to invest. And so the more often somebody's going to see your name and see the comments that you're adding, you have value, you have knowledge, that in their mind is like, oh, this is someone that really knows what they're doing. And again, going back to that conversation is, a lot of private money lenders, when they start out, they don't necessarily know they don't give themselves that label. They're just like, oh, I'm going to work with an active investor and I'll provide the capital. So maybe they start out doing like a JV deal, for example. So they're on the debt side and the equity side of the equation. And then once they kind of get a taste for that, they're like, oh yeah, if I don't ever have to talk to a contractor again, here's my money, just please pay me, payments, whatever their goal is. So I would say really getting out there and networking and talking with people, making those connections, adding value. So you don't necessarily have to add value to someone by finding them a deal. You could talk to another investor and be like, hey, I had this great experience with this property management company, and here's the awesome things they did with my property. And then they almost kind of owe you one. You're like, oh, later on, a couple months later, you see them at another meetup and you're like, hey, I'm out there looking for, it's just some private capital. I have a deal coming up that I need some private capital. Do you happen to know anybody in the market? And then they're like, oh yeah, this guy just gave me a great reference for, fantastic property management company. I kind of owe them one. Oh yeah, there's this dentist that I talk to routinely. I don't have anything for him right now, but maybe he has something, you have something for him. So it's really just a matter of going out there, adding value, education, kind of being seen as a thought leader in your market or your style of investing, whatever you're happen to be doing. It doesn't have to be, kind of hustle, 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 grind, grind, grind. You have to be up on stage. It's really not that. It's just kind of having that, what I call quiet presence. You're there, you're adding value, you're talking to people, you're not kind of being upfront about it. You're just like, hey, this, in my experience in this market, these properties in this neighborhood are going to sit on the market for 63 days on average. So not really going to be a great fix and flip, property if your loan's only out for 4 months. And if I talk to someone that said that, me as a lender, I like, oh crap, like he really knows this neighborhood, be able to say off the top of his head, it's 63 days. And, that builds credibility with me. So even if he's not currently a borrower, me as a private lender, I'm still listening to the conversation, even if he's not a borrower. And I can go back to him in a couple of months and say, hey, I really liked your input on that particular deal. If you have ever have anything that crosses your desk that's a fix and flip, let me know, because I'd be interested in working with you. So it's really those kind of small little moments that continuously build the relationship.
I think that's good advice. And I also wanted to kind of talk about, I don't think this gets talked about enough either, is there's a very specific language you have to use, right? When you're seeking private money, especially like I see people putting posts up and stuff on Facebook, and you have to be very careful about how you word those things. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and why it's important how you're wording things?
If you are seeking funding, you know, it really depends on the state. In some places, you can kind of run amok with security laws. But then also, just in general, just from a personal standpoint, if you go out there and say you are looking for private money for this deal or you need this amount of money, you are going to get spammed with every quote unquote fake private lender out there. And they're going, oh, yeah, we can give you 100% of the purchase price. We'll throw in an extra $5,000 for closing cost. All it's going to be is 5% interest. You can have the loan for 30 years. Doesn't even have to be secured against the property. All you need to do is send us $5,000 as a funding fee. And then it happens daily. Somebody sends these quote unquote private lenders $5,000 for their funding fee. And then of course they ghost them and disappear and they're on to their next victim. So that's why I always advocate, like, the money has to change hands only through the title company or the closing attorney, because it's just way too easy. And even when you think about as a borrower, if you are sending documentation, because we're going to ask for very similar documentation than the bank would. So we're going to want to see asset statements. We might potentially pull your credit. And if we're doing that, we're obviously having access to your social security number. We want a copy of your ID. So we have your driver's license number, your address. You're giving over a lot of sensitive information. So if you're just out there publicly posting that you're looking for this capital, and then you start getting all these people like, oh yeah, I can do it. I can do this loan. I can do this loan. And then you think you got it made, problem solved. But a lot of times, especially on public forums like social media, it's going to be those scammers that want to just basically get you to pay whatever they're calling their funding fee or origination points. And then they're going to take the money and run, or even worse, they now have your identity, and then you've had your identity stolen.
Right. And there's that question of solicitation too, right? Like you
Yes.
can't, right. There's a thing with that, right? Like you can't solicit money online or I'm probably not saying it right, but there are some parameters there, because you can get in trouble with, I guess is it the SEC, I guess?
Yeah, because I mean, it depending on how you word it and how you structure it and what your laws are in your state, you could kind of be construed as selling a security. And if you're not a licensed broker dealer, that you end up running amok with problems with the SEC, because you're technically out there kind of selling securities to something and you haven't registered anything or gone through that process. So that's definitely another consideration. It's possible to just say, hey, I'm looking to take down this deal. I'm purchasing it for $90,000. I'm looking for some private money, say in the $65,000 range. I need it for a year. I think that's probably acceptable in most places. I'm not an attorney, but I see that pretty frequently, for example, in my own group. And you're not necessarily soliciting directly to a person. It's just like, here's what it is. It's going to be secured by a deed of trust or a mortgage. It's all, again, all the funds are going through a title company. So it's not, two individuals directly exchanging funds.
Mm-hmm. I think another workaround for that too, from what I've heard, because I don't do posts like that. I've got my people now, but
yeah.
You can say something like, like show them a deal that you've already done. So not something that's actively being pursued or worked on, but you can go back and say, hey, I did this deal. My investor made, $5,500 in interest on, and I think that's kind of a workaround too for that. So it's showing a deal that's already been done. It's already in the past. It's not like you're actively looking for like this one deal, but to show like, hey, we did this deal. My investor made this much money. If you're interested in getting a return like that, send me a message or something.
Yeah, and that also speaks to building the relationship, because you're going to want to have a private money lender kind of in your bucket before you actually have a deal under contract. So, it's kind of one of those situations. If you're an active investor that wants to use exclusively private money like you do, you're basically always in capital raising mode, because you want to have those background, because if you make contact with a private money lender, you guys hit it off, but you don't have a deal that they want to fund for a couple of months. But then another opportunity pops up, like, okay, well, the 150,000 they had sort of promised to you is now out, in a syndication or out with another loan with another borrower. So it tends not to kind of sit around too long. So you're kind of always in this position of waiting for capital come in, if you have just a small pool of private lenders, or you're just constantly in capital raising mode.
I agree. Yeah. And I think it is good to work with multiple lenders, like for that exact reason, because you don't know if they're working with other people or not. And, like you said, if you don't have a deal, like what are you going to bring to the table at that point? Their money might be deployed somewhere else and it could be out for a while, and you don't want to end up losing out on something because you couldn't get the funds for it. So it is important to, and I think too, right, communicating with the lender and just like, how much are you willing to lend? How long do you expect your money to be out? I think those are good questions too for a borrower to ask the private money lender as
Yes.
well, just so that they kind of have an idea of like, okay, well, I know this person's got this much cash and this one's got this much cash, and like they've got this project coming up, so I can't use that one. I'm probably gonna have to use this one. I think that diversification is important, having those different lenders too.
Yes. And I would say another aspect that I think a lot of people don't think about, especially upfront, is the expectation for communication needs to be established very early on. So there are
Agreed.
some private money lenders that are like, yeah, don't just send me a check once a month. I don't need to know what's going on. And then there's other private money lenders that are like, I want a weekly update. I want a video walkthrough. I want to know when this is happening, when this is happening. And then there's everything in between. So having that conversation really early on, because first, again, trying to invest with people that you know, like, and trust. So having that conversation early on, if you're dealing with a private lender that wants to know everything that's happening, it might be unrealistic for them to expect you to do a video walkthrough every single day. You're like, yep, there's 6 more tile that are on the wall. Yep, that wall got painted. If you don't have time for that, you're just setting yourself up for failure in that relationship. It's going to be an unhappy private lender. You're going to be just driven absolutely crazy because the communication expectations in your mind are too high. And then vice versa. If you have someone who has communication expectations where they're just like, yeah, mail me a check once every 30 days, I don't care. But then you're sending them video walkthroughs and 75 photos a day. And, here's how they place this beautiful tile. You're going to drive them crazy in the other direction. So I would say one of those terms that you can negotiate for a loan is really the, communication aspect, because that's really what's going to save and maintain that relationship, to have them do multiple loans with you. So once you do find a private money lender, again, it's like any relationship. You want to foster that relationship and meet their needs, but obviously not to the sacrifice of your own. So if you're not the type of person that wants to do, weekly video walkthroughs and give email updates when supplies have been ordered and the tile's been installed, then don't work with a private money lender where that's their expectation for communication.
That is an excellent point. I'm really glad you brought that up, really, because that's something I think that gets overlooked a lot too. And I hadn't thought about that in a while. Really glad you said that, because that just came up with me with this new private money lender that I just started using, because he was referred to me from somebody else. So I didn't really know him that well. He kind of took a risk. It was the same thing. It was the trust thing. The person that recommended me, he had a very deep trust with. And so, by the same token, he kind of pass that trust on to me. And so, I wanted to make sure I kept him in the loop with what was going on, but it's like, am I saying too much or not enough? Because my other lenders, like, they don't care. They're the ones that are just like, just give me my money at closing and we're good. They don't ask me, how's the project going? How much longer? Any of this stuff. But because this lender was new, I thought, well, I wanted to make him feel comfortable too, because I think it was his first time maybe doing private lending. So I wanted to make sure he felt comfortable. And I think that's good too when you're first starting out, is, setting that expectation, but then just, how many, maybe if you put it, on you to them, like, how many updates would you like? I can just kind of keep you updated as how the project's going, or do you just want to have it, just know when it's done or whatever. So I try not to bug him too much, but it was something I hadn't thought about because I hadn't had to do that in so long. And he would text me periodically, like, how's it going? How much longer do you think it's going to be? And it's like, I didn't have to do that before. So I'm like, crap, like trying to figure stuff out, and let him know when there was a delay. Because I quickly realized that's the kind of person he is. So I think it's also like, what personality style is your lender? Do they require, how much do they want to know? How much do they want to be involved?
Yeah. And another aspect that I think often gets overlooked until everybody's kind of at the closing table is the draw process. So a lot of active investors will think, oh, I'm going to leave closing with, $50,000 in renovation funds. Whereas most private lenders that I know do a refund draw model. So you're going to have to outlay some cash, the $6,000 or $7,000 to put a roof on, and then provide documentation that the roof was put on, that the roofer was paid in full. You have an invoice that shows paid in full. You have a lien waiver that shows, signed off that it was paid in full. And then you get your $7,000 back from the roof, and then you're on to the next stage of the job. So I think another aspect is a lot of active investors kind of think, oh, I'm going to get money for the purchase price and the renovations because I'm below that magic, ARV number, when in reality, most private lenders are not going to they're not going to let you leave closing with a big check of cash, because there's no security in that to say that that money's actually going to end up in the property. There's nothing stopping them from taking that money and going to Vegas and having a great weekend. And then at that point, you're upside down on the property because you gave them funds for renovation. Then now the renovation money's in Vegas and not in the house. So you're technically upside down in the house because it's not fully renovated.
Okay, well, I feel really lucky now all of a sudden because my lenders do fund me. They fund the purchase and the rehab costs. So
yeah,
that has been nice versus having to deal with a draw. Like, I understand, if I was on the other side, I might want that draw process. But again, back to like my long-term private money lender, he will only loan the purchase price and like a small amount of the rehab, but not all of it. And his whole point is like, he wants to make sure that we have skin in the game, which I understand. After a while, it's kind of like, okay, seriously. But most of them, the other ones that I've worked with are funding purchase and rehab costs. But again, it could be relational, like just because we have had such a long relationship.
Yeah. And most of the private lenders I know will fund the purchase price and the renovations. It's just a matter of when is that funding actually going to be spendable by the borrower. So that can vary wildly from, you can leave closing with $20,000 to, you can leave closing with $5,000 to get supplies ordered or get your contractor paid for, their kind of first deposit, to absolutely not. You're not leaving closing with any of the renovation money. It's really the whole gamut and everything in between. So again, that's another one of those terms that a lot of active investors don't think about that could even be potentially negotiated, or they don't even think to ask. And then when they go to the closing table and sign on the dotted line, they're like, wait, why am I not leaving closing with $30,000? Because that's what it's going to cost to renovate this property. Like, no, that's not how it works. So again, going back to those terms, it's really, really important that you iron out all those terms for what's important to you and what your expectations are, and making sure they mesh with the private money lender you're looking to work with.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a wealth of information. I love talking about private money. I think you're the first person I've got to like dig deep with private money on, because I think it doesn't get talked about enough. And I think people, they just, you don't know what you don't know. So hopefully this brings some of that to light and answers some questions that people might have about being on both sides of the table, being a lender or being a borrower. I just think there's so much benefit in private money lending for everybody.
Oh,
so
yeah.
People, if they want to reach out to you and talk more about maybe becoming a borrower, or talk to you about, a little bit more about private lending, how can they reach you?
Absolutely. So there's a couple different ways. I run an educational and networking Facebook group called Private Lending Lessons. And basically we have weekly educational events. We have daily discussions about private lending, various questions. It is open to active investors because, like I mentioned before, there's not a lot of education out there for even active investors to use private money. And then we also have a weekly kind of deals post where if you are an individual looking for funding or looking for a new relationship, you can post on that weekly deals post, and people, the group's 4,000 people now, about a year later. From its origination point. So it's grown tremendously in a year. So obviously there was a need and people are finding value in it. So feel free to join the group. I'm on LinkedIn. So my personal mantra is I invest passively to live actively. So that's actually my URL for LinkedIn, but you can find me Alex Breshears. You can just type in my name. Feel free to send me a message on Facebook or in LinkedIn. You'll see me in the group, all the time in private lending lessons. Because like I said, that's kind of my love of, my love project. What do they call it? My purpose project.
Passion project.
Yes, my passion project. That's really what it is. Sometimes it's just like, but it's been a lot of good. I've personally talked to people that have met business partners through it. I've personally talked to people who have found lenders through it. I've talked to other women that are involved in real estate that they never wanted to be a landlord. They never wanted to do fix and flip, but they still wanted to be involved in real estate. And now they're full-fledged private lenders. You know, they're brokering deals for other people. They're going to start a fund, you know, to do private lending out of. Like, they're doing all these big things, and they found their kind of niche within real estate investing. Even though they're a full-time mom and they have a full-time 40-hour-a-week job, it's provided a way for them to invest at their comfort level. And again, go back to that collaborative nature. That's just their personality. They enjoy it. So it's really been kind of a godsend. I've thoroughly enjoyed just meeting all the people in the group. And, you know, we have monthly networking events, so people kind of show up for mixers and get to talk to private lenders. We did a Shark Tank event a couple months ago, and
Oh, fun.
active investors got to kind of practice their pitch. We had a panel of private lenders, and just to kind of show the difference in private lenders, you know, we had one opinion of a private lender way over here, another opinion of another private lender way over there. And, you know, the audience kind of got to see how a pitch, you know, would go, what different private lenders were looking for, what their questions were. So it's 100% free, 100% educational and networking based.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm going to go check that out myself. Get involved.
It's tons of fun. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all this great information. And I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a great time.